Hey, welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR, and with me today I have two awesome guests. I have Justin from the Bucky Report to talk through some Wisconsin basketball and the rest of the Big Ten with us, and I also have Mike from the Nebraska Shootaround. That's right, we have a guest from a Nebraska basketball podcast. I found them, they're out there, and you can find them too on YouTube. They're a great podcast. I love listening to those guys. But first, we're going to introduce Justin. He's going to tell you where you can find him and listen to the Bucky Report. Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, you can check us out at the Bucky Report on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it at this point. Email us at thebuckyreport@gmail.com, and that's pretty much it. You can find us at any place on podcast or on YouTube under just the Bucky Report.
There we go. And the Bucky Report, I know, is hopping right now with the huge win they had over Marquette. So we're going to get into that a little bit later. It's awesome. And Mike, go ahead and tell people about you or where they can find you at.
I'm from the Scarlet Shootaround Podcast. As you had mentioned, we cover Nebraska basketball. You can find us Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, Scarlet Shootaround Pod, I think, is our handle there. And then anywhere you find your podcast, as well as YouTube at Scarlet Shootaround Podcast. So
there we go. Scarlet Shootaround Podcast. Go check them out. A lot of good Nebraska basketball content over there. All right. Before we get into it, do want to remind you we are brought to you by Big Banter Sports, bigbantersports.com. Go there for all your Big Ten media needs. In addition to that, please do like and subscribe to this video. We appreciate that. And if you're listening on podcast, give us a rating as well. That also helps us out. And tell us why you gave us the rating you gave us. Somebody gave us a 2-star rating the other day. That's all they gave us. I'm like, all right, well, let me know why we're 2 stars. I'd like to improve a little bit. So let us know. We appreciate that. And if it's 5 stars, just say, good job. All right, that's all we need there. So, all right, well, let's get into it, guys. A huge win for Northwestern. They did the same thing last year at Northwestern. Purdue falls 92-88. This was a big win. Zach Edey and Braden Smith, all those guys, they fought hard. But at the end of the day, Boo Buie and his arsenal were just too much. Justin, what were your thoughts on this game?
He made some incredible shots, and they were unconventional shots looking at him. Like, there were a couple times he was really off balance and he was still able to put it down. And Boo Buie just put on a show in that one. I think this is going to be the story with Purdue all season long, is they're going to struggle with teams with good backcourts, because while their backcourt is improved over last year, they still do not have guys who can really check a dynamic playmaker at the guard position. And Edey can only do so much. You still have to set him up to be successful.
And he can only pass so well, too. That was another thing I noticed with Northwestern was, Edey was trying to make good passes, but at the end of the day, that Nebraska defense was just suffocating, not only to him, but the guards as well. It was just a really tough matchup for them, and they played with their hair on fire all game. Massive credit to them. Mike, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I know a lot of people like to talk about it when it comes to March, specifically about guard play and how far it can take you. But I think this just goes to show, even in, I guess, December now, same thing can happen. I mean, if you have good guard play, you got guys that can fill up the bucket. You can beat anybody. And I think Northwestern showed that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, Braden Smith and Fletcher Loyer in this game, 12 and 17, that's what you want. But 6 turnovers for Braden Smith, I was talking about him earlier in the year on this podcast, talking about, hey, his turnovers are up a little bit more, but his assists are also up. I mean, when you only have 1 assist by Fletcher Loyer, but 2 turnovers, that's not going to cut it. Yes, Braden Smith had 9 assists, but at what cost? With 6 turnovers in this game. I do still have concerns about Purdue. I think they're improving. I don't think they're the same team they were last year, but it does give me concern. I saw some Purdue fans saying fire Matt Painter. I don't think that's your answer, guys. Personally,
definitely not.
I know. I was going to say, I think Nebraska would happily take him if they want to.
Yeah, no kidding.
Hands, so.
And then suddenly you'll start sprouting up 7'3" guys on your roster.
I think they just had like a 7-3 guy signed the other day or something like that. But I mean, Zach Edey, he went 15 for 20 from the free throw line. He got 17 shots off. Fletcher Loyer, he honestly didn't do bad shooting the 3 of 5. At the end of the day, it was just a shootout. Northwestern got the turnovers they needed to get, and they scored off of them well. Justin, you tell me, what does this say about this Northwestern team? Are we maybe thinking they're a little bit better than maybe we went into the year with them losing some key players, but Boo Buie is still there? What are your thoughts?
I think as long as you have a guy like that in your roster, you have a chance. And I actually think Collins is a pretty solid coach. So I expect them to be a problem. I don't know if I'm putting them at the top of the league, but I think they're going to be a team that you have to be locked in to play against, or they will sneak up on you and take you down. So it wouldn't shock me if they end up being the top half of the league. And I think that if you don't come in locked into that game, they definitely are a team that can take you down and make you pay for it.
For sure, for sure. Mike, in this game, the Purdue had, what was it, 52 rebounds total. Northwestern had 27 rebounds total. I mean, if you when you nearly double the other team's total rebounds, you shouldn't be able to win. How did Northwestern manage to get this win with so few rebounds?
Yeah, I think the key is if you're looking at the box score and how the game ended up, Northwestern shot 50% from three. They went 10 for 20. If you have that type of shooting night, if you're going 50% behind the arc, you can lose on the glass like that. I mean, that's a big margin. That's why the game went to OT, ending up like that, a massive margin like that. But if the 3-point shot's not there for Northwestern, I don't think there's a chance that they win this game. But they had a great shooting night, and then they pulled them through.
Yeah, and I mean, their defense was running around the entire game, too. I think another key for them was how Northwestern was able to stretch the floor. Even Nicholson, who isn't, the best three-point shooter in the world, he actually didn't even take a single three this game, but he was able to maneuver around the court with Zach Edey on him, but still get open, make the things happen that needed to happen. And, of course, he only played 12 minutes in this game, but when he was in there, he played well. I thought Purdue had a far bigger rotation than what they needed to. Mason Gillis got 29 minutes, so
he was the one.
That, but go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, I was gonna say he was the guy that honestly he was the forgotten man in this game. Yeah. He played heavy minutes and really wasn't overly productive. And you kind of look at that and it's like you can't have a dead spot on the court. And a game like this, that's the difference.
No, I agree, and that was what I was going to get to next. When you play nearly 30 minutes a game and you only provide 4 points, I mean, you just have to be a massive defensive, person to be able to play nearly 30 minutes and only get 4 points. But that's my concern with Mason Gillis. If he's not out there and producing and stretching the floor like he needs to be, I mean, he's had games where he just hit a bunch of threes, and that's awesome. But if he's not able to do that, I don't know how much he offers to this team. Am I off there, Mike?
No, I agree. I mean, he only attempted 2 shots the whole game. I'd see he had 6 rebounds, but no assists, no steals. So, yeah, I guess you scratch your head and kind of wonder what he did provide in those nearly 30 minutes. I didn't get to watch the game, so maybe he was helping, stretch the floor, what have you, things that don't show up in the box score. But like you said, kind of the forgotten man. It didn't look like a great night for him. And if you're putting in that much time, I think you need to help out the team a little bit more than what he did.
Yeah, I agree, and I think Langborg has been this catalyst for Northwestern that they need. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Boo Buie is the catalyst that really makes everything work, but he needs that right-hand man like an Adige was last year, and I just didn't know who that was going to be this year for Northwestern. I thought maybe Barnheiser, which Barnheiser has been fantastic this season too. He only had 8 points in this game, but he was still somebody that was able to make plays. Only 1 turnover. He had 4 fouls. But when you go up against Zach Edey, that's going to happen. He's going to get 10 to 20 to sometimes 30 free throws a game. So you just got to rotate guys in there. But Northwestern, they had 2 guys foul out in this game. Justin, do you have any thoughts about officiating Zach Edey and whether this game was fair, how that goes? Just gauge you not only on this game, but just in general, officiating Zach Edey.
I'm a strong proponent of it's his job to adjust to everyone else rather than the refs adjusting to him. Like, you can't let him just abuse other people because he's bigger. He's got to learn to find a way to be as productive as everybody else on the court without fouling. And he does, you watch some of it. There's a couple of his dunks that I'm watching, and he's just throwing his body into him. Like, what do you do with that as a defender? You have good position, and he basically just shoves you out of the way. I'm like, that's like brother ball in the front yard playing, and you're just shoving your little brother out of the way and just throwing a layup. And it's like, I mean, that's kind of an offensive foul. Like, there's only so much you can do if you're going to body up like that. Now, you have to let him play to an extent, but we've seen so many times where elbows get hit, guys get drilled in the face, and it's like, it's his job to kind of learn to play around people without doing that. And if somebody takes an elbow in the face, that's got to be called an offensive foul in my book, like whether it's inadvertent or not.
Well, some of that's just the size of who he is, you know? I mean, part of it too, when I was watching the game, I was thinking to myself, like Zach Edey goes up for a rebound. He's boxed out, but he still gets higher than him.
Yeah.
Is that an over the back? Is that
Yeah.
like, I don't know how to call that if
Yeah.
I'm the ref. Do you have any thoughts on that, Mike?
Yeah, and I know we'll get into the Creighton game a little later. They had a 7-1 guy that was playing center tonight, and yeah, they just go up and grab the rebound over a guy. I know I was screaming, particularly in the first half of the game, a little closer than what it ended up being, screaming for some over the backs. But yeah, if the dude's long enough, I don't know how you judge that as a ref. I know me personally, I think I agree with Justin. I think it's kind of their responsibility to learn to play around the guys without just resorting to bully ball. Maybe that's the little brother in me coming out, but yeah, it's almost like watching like prime Shaq or something where the dude's just bigger and stronger than everyone, and I don't know what you're supposed to do as a defender, which I guess credit to him for being born with the genetics to be that massive and athletic, but maybe a little more finesse is what I'd like to see personally, and maybe a little bit tighter calling on the refs for making him, perform that way.
Yeah, and it's so different to see how he gets called from game to game, because right when you get into the Big Ten, it's like you almost let anything go because they almost seem like they're used to calling him. But when you get into the tournament, or even when you watched him in the Maui earlier this season, it was a bit more ticky-tack than maybe you've seen at other times. So, all right, good discussion there, guys, about Northwestern and Purdue. Let's move on to Wisconsin and Marquette. So Marquette comes into Madison, Wisconsin. The Badgers take it to them, beat number 3 Marquette 75-64. Justin, what were the thoughts on your Badgers?
Honestly, I've had good thoughts about this Wisconsin team since basically Tennessee. They've been very efficient offensively, even though they haven't shot super well. And the rebounding numbers and defensive metrics have really picked up since Providence. So basically, the way I look at this team is you have 5-6 guys overall on the team that are capable of giving you double digits in any given game, and it makes them incredibly difficult to defend. And that kind of played out again in this one, where you look at it, you had 4 starters with double digits, and the 5th guy had 9. So you look at it, and it's kind of pick your poison with Wisconsin this year. There's nobody that's going to go off for 30 points, but there's a bunch of guys that can get you 15. And if you're going to start trying to take away one thing, you're probably going to get burned somewhere else, because each of the guys is capable of, well, they're not all capable of scoring from all over the court. They're capable of getting to their spots and getting themselves good shots.
You know who is capable of scoring all over the court is Max Klesmit. I mean, dude, 5 for 10 in this one, 21 points. I was astounded, and Marquette just had no answer for him. He was just roaming around the three-point arc. Seemed like he was able to do whatever he wanted. He had that one shot within the arc, so he did get one that was not a three-pointer. But I mean, the dude he was just outstanding in the game, able to hit every shot, do everything. And I think Chucky Hepburn is actually starting to play the way that Chucky Hepburn wants to play. I think that's huge. He is not asked to be this guy that he is not naturally going to be. Justin, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's one of the bigger takeaways that I've had coming into the season. I did not like it last year, and I think that unfairly, and even from my perspective, I probably was a little harder on him than I should have been. I really don't like step back threes, because I think, to me, it's not a high percentage shot. And if you're in the NBA and you're a guy who's just a freak show, like Steph Curry or something like that, go ahead, throw it up. You're probably 40% even on that shot. But in college, it's such a dead shot normally, and it just puts you in a bind overall in terms of your offensive sets, because people get really stagnant and don't do a whole lot. Chucky has been incredible, and actually this game, I actually had him as my player of the game, and a big part of it was playing a guy like Kolek. You're really afraid that your point guard is going to try to go toe-to-toe with him and try playing the same way and playing a game of one-up. Chucky didn't do that. He just kept the control of the game and kind of kept leaning on him and let Marquette make the mistakes in this one. And it was huge for them in the second half when Marquette made their run. His ability to kind of keep them just kind of towing the line and keep doing the same thing and stay locked in. Don't try to do too much.
Yeah, Detman made a really good point here. Madison is a tough place to play football and basketball. And it's true. I mean, you get in there to Madison, and the crowds are just the fans are just crazy. It's always a big crowd. Credit to those fans, because they do make it a really, really tough place to play. Mike, what were some of your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I think the big standout to me is just the talent from Wisconsin's starting five. They played a vast majority of the minutes. Maybe they're not the deepest team in the league, but that's a starting five. I think that can go toe to toe with anybody. You mentioned anybody's viable to go off for double digits. You already mentioned 4 of them did go off for double-digit points this game. It's a team that they're really well-rounded. I know it's tough to see Chucky Hepburn, as a guy from Nebraska balling out in Wisconsin, but it's good to see that. Glad for him. Glad for the Badgers. It's a massive win, obviously. Marquette's a really, really solid squad. Glad one team got to win an in-state rivalry game this weekend. So
yeah, we'll get to yours next. Don't worry. We'll get there. Justin, just a couple quick questions gauging your thoughts on some of these players. Connor Essegian, only 3 minutes. He hasn't seemed to be the guy this season that I think some people were expecting him to be. When we did our preview, we were expecting really big things from Connor Essegian this game, being a big 6-man. And not just this game, but, he just hasn't seemed to be that guy this season. What are some of your thoughts on Connor Essegian?
Sure. Off the start from this one, there are a couple of reasons why I think this is happening. Number one, Connor had somebody come down on him in I think the Tennessee game. Early on in that game, somebody came down on his back and basically bent him in half, and he was kind of banged up after that for the last 4 or 5 games. He seems to be struggling to kind of get back in the rolling on this, and he's a guy who, if we're being honest, he's more of an outside threat. He's a guy who, from an offensive perspective, is not necessarily somebody who's a 3-level scorer. So if he's not shooting well, he's not necessarily a guy who creates a lot on the court for your team, other than to be a guy who's going to potentially cause some gravity from the defensive standpoint. The bigger part of this, I think, is John Blackwell off the bench has been incredible as a first-year player. Plays super under control. He got a couple of early fouls in the Marquette game, so he didn't play as much as he had earlier. But he looks like a guy who's going to be an all-conference type player in a couple of years. More athletic than we expected. His understanding of how to play the game in terms of being under control and taking what's there and only taking the shots that are smart shots is well ahead of his time. And because of that, he's been a guy that was in double digits, I think, prior to this one, like the last 4 games before that. I think he'd been in double digits every game. So he's kind of been stealing it because he's not only a very effective scorer at all 3 levels, but he's also a guy who's a really good defender. And that's what he came in as, somebody who they thought was going to be a defensive presence right off the bat. And that would be where he'd steal minutes.
Yeah, for sure. No, I that was another guy I was going to ask you about was Blackwell, because I feel like he, as a freshman, that we didn't really expect to be able to make the impact that he's making for his team. When we did our top 5 list of freshmen earlier in the season, or at the beginning of the season, he was one that I thought of, but I was like, no, I think there's some other guys. But he's really proved himself to be a big freshman and very impactful for this team this year. So, all right, let's move on to Creighton and Nebraska. This was a big game for Nebraska. They were 7-0. It was kind of like that test game to see, can they play well and can they keep it close. I think Nebraska was respectable at times. I think they played well, but at the end of the day, Creighton came in and they just really took it to them and kind of showed us that yes, Nebraska was 7-0 and they did a really good job beating the teams they should beat. But at the end of the day, Creighton is still the better team in this scenario. Mike, what were some of your thoughts?
Yeah, frankly, Creighton was the better team today. They're the better team probably about 99% of the time. It's a really good squad, and it pains me to say that as a Nebraska basketball fan, obviously, but it's a really solid team. Obviously, they're returning a lot of guys. They went to the Elite 8 last year. They got a ton of experience. They got 5 guys that can shoot the 3, so it makes defense for Nebraska pretty tough, and they did shoot a lot of 3s today, actually.
I think they put up 40, didn't they? Like
40.
14
They
for
shot 14 for 40. Yeah. Wow. As opposed to 2 for 22 for Nebraska. So what is that? A 42-6 edge for Creighton on 3-point, points. So that was tough. I think the big takeaway from me is kind of, I think it was a little disappointing from our front court. I know Josiah Alec and Rink Mast and them guys. I think Josiah Alec ended up taking as many threes as Casey Tominaga, which is not, I'm sure that probably wasn't in the game plan for us. So I think Creighton did a great job forcing Nebraska into uncomfortable positions, things they didn't want to do, where not so much on the other end. Nebraska were a big help defense, and I think Creighton was able to utilize that, pass out of that, pass the ball around the three-point arc and get some good looks, and they made them today, whereas last year when we beat them, they didn't quite fill up the bucket like they did today. So
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that shows the discipline of this Creighton team to be able to see the help defense and make those decisions that they need to make. And I think this is obviously a bummer for Nebraska, but I do think things are looking up for them. Fred Hoiberg obviously is struggling, with some of his perception at the end of last season, but he was able to help that out, and he's helping that out by continuing to win to start this season. So we'll see where that goes. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't look at this game and say this defines Nebraska this season. I think they're a better team than we thought going in, for sure. Do you have any more thoughts on Fred Hoiberg and just like the perception of this team this season, Mike?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. This isn't a season-defining loss by any means. Obviously, you'd love to get a big statement win like this, but there's a whole conference slate ahead with a conference that is definitely looking. I know start of the season was looking kind of shaky, but now there's been some pretty big wins around the conference from Ohio State and Wisconsin, and kind of proving that the Big Ten's a pretty solid conference. So there's a whole conference slate ahead. Tough loss as it is. I think Fred Hoiberg, me personally. It kind of depends who you ask. I'm a firm believer. I think this is finally kind of the first year where he's kind of getting a group of guys that are kind of the type of guys that he wants to play with. We have more shooters this year. We don't have to play. I mean, last year was really nitty gritty, really defensive, playing outside in. I think we want to play a little more, or inside out last year, excuse me. I think typically we want to play more outside in, shoot more threes, kind of get out and run the ball a little bit faster, a little bit quicker pace. So I think this is the first year. I think I'm excited about what the Huskers are doing. I think definitely looking up this year. They were 7-0 for the first time since I think it was 1992-93. Obviously, maybe not playing the best opponents, but to win the games you're supposed to win isn't something that we've seen out of Huskers in a long time. So just to see that is really promising. Excited to see what they can do in the conference this year for sure.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to say about winning the games you're supposed to win. And they did beat an Oregon State team. I know Oregon State's not the best team out there, but that's still, an upper-level team that they're able to beat and take care of business there. But you're right. It's so hard to play outside in when you're shooting 2 for 22 in the game. I mean, that just disrupts your entire offense, and you really have no answer to do anything else. Justin, what were your thoughts about Nebraska in this game, and maybe just kind of like your overall thoughts this season?
Sure. Well, Tominaga is a guy who torched us last year a couple of times, and it's this was one. Seeing him not go off once was interesting.
He still had 20.
Yeah, no kidding. But did not hit from outside. Like I know the game against Wisconsin last year, he absolutely was hitting bombs left and right. So the big takeaway that I had from this one was outside shooting was just Nebraska just struggled from deep, and it really put them in a bind. You don't really have a go-to inside scorer at this point, and if you don't have that, it can be really tough to kind of generate offense if you're just not able to, unless you have guys that are really good at attacking the rim.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think Tominaga has to be that guy who leads the outside shooting and really leads the team in being able to make it work. But he is still young, and it's hard to put all of this weight on him. He has a bright future. Obviously, he's played nationally and done all these things. But at the end of the day, this is still a kid, and he still has to be able to make those things happen. And I think Fred Hoiberg's coaching will help him be able to develop and get there to where the team needs to be. Mike, before we move on, I've been very impressed with Rink Mast this season. Obviously, he didn't have the game he hoped to have in this one, but just kind of give us some of your thoughts on him in this game and just overall this season.
Yeah, I know Justin was talking about not necessarily having that guy on the inside you can go to. I think Rink has kind of provided that through the first 7 games. He didn't have, like you said, the greatest showing today. Being able to have a big guy that's able to kind of bully ball a little bit inside when those shots aren't landing. I think he's got a pretty diverse post game. He's got a good set of moves he can use down there. He's also able to stretch the 3. I think it brings a lot to the team. I think might be the biggest. I think maybe Bryce Williams is vying for that, but the biggest addition to these teams are definitely Rick Mast and Bryce Williams. I think Mast is definitely bringing something the Huskers needed for this year for this team. I think he's going to have a rebound game, I hope, against Minnesota here on Wednesday. So we'll see. He had a tough night shooting. I mean, he went 3 for 11. He only went 1 for 5 from 3. So pretty rough outing. I mean, you can say that about most Huskers today, but it's definitely a guy to keep an eye on. I've been very impressed by him this year for sure.
Speaking of Minnesota, that's where we'll go next, because we have Ohio State against Minnesota earlier today. I think they tipped just 3 hours ago, so game ended just about an hour ago in this one. Ohio State wins 84-74. I think the story of this game was Ohio State just wasn't able to pull ahead like they wanted to. They were playing very well, but Minnesota just felt like every single time had a way to stay within 10 points, stay right there. I don't think they were ever really making Ohio State scared, like they were going to come back or anything, but they kind of kept hanging around, kept being there, just close enough to make sure Ohio State couldn't take their starters out or anything. And Jamison Battle got to come back after he was the villain last year. He was waving to the crowd, he was after Minnesota beat him, and now he's back here playing against Minnesota, and a lot of the same guys were on this roster. Dawson Garcia, Ben Johnson still coaching, that kind of stuff. Mike, what were your thoughts on the Buckeyes versus the Gophers in this one?
Yeah, like you said, I think the fact that they're unable to pull away, I know Ohio State's been looking really good these last couple of weeks. For Minnesota to stick around, I don't know if that says more about Minnesota or Ohio State. I think Minnesota's kind of a scrappy team. I know they're going to give you their best. Garcia with 25 shot attempts today for 36 points. That's incredible. Obviously, a guy you're going to have to key in on if you're going up against them. But as you mentioned, Battle 4 for 6 from 3, 7 for 12 from the field, 25 points. Ohio State had 25 points, 26 points from Thornton there. So pretty impressed by what the Buckeyes have done the last couple of weeks. I know they shot almost 53% from beyond the arc, so great shooting night as far as that goes. So I'm impressed by what Ohio State's been showing recently for sure.
Well, they showed that guard duo that we've been talking about that you really need. Bruce Thornton, he just has a score-first mentality that is kind of surprising to me. We didn't really see it last season. Now, he still had 5 assists in this game, so it's not like he, is only thinking to score and doesn't want to pass. But he just gets the ball, and it's like, if the rim is there, he's taking it. He's going to get to the rim. He's going to make it happen. And he can even shoot from the outside a little bit. 1 for 3 in this game, not bad. Enough to keep the defense honest. Justin, what were some of your thoughts on the Buckeyes and the Gophers in this one?
Yeah, a big one for me was, if you look at this game, the Buckeyes the outside shooting for them was such a huge factor. I mean, over 50% from 3. They were good from the free throw line, 23-28, and, they're almost 50% shooting overall. So this team, they played pretty efficient. I mean, that's just going to be really tough for another team to be able to take them down, even with a guy like Garcia going off for what he did in this game. And I just think that Minnesota is one of those teams that's still kind of trying to build with Ben Johnson there and trying to get a talent base in that they feel comfortable and confident with. They were kind of in a rough shape coming into his time as coach. And it's going to take them a little bit, I think, to kind of put together the talent base that they need in order to be really able to compete in the Big Ten.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention Ohio State's version of Mason Gillis with Evan Mahaffey. I'm still trying to figure this dude out, guys. 0 points, 22 minutes, but he's out there with 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals. I mean, the dude is all over the place, but he also has 2 turnovers. I don't know what to make of this kid. He's like a glue guy, but at the same time, you can't really rely on him for anything offensively. It's baffling to me what he's able to do on the floor and how he's able to make this offense stick. At some point, somebody is going to have to say, Mahaffey, just shoot. We're gonna double team Bruce Thornton. We're gonna double team Zed Key and Felix Akpal, all these guys. Just shoot. We're not even going to start guarding you. Do you see that happening soon, Mike?
Yeah, I think if you're an opposing head coach, you got to start looking at the film and kind of making that adjustment. And yeah, you got to be leaving him open. I always say, if you're that wide open, if there's probably a good reason you're that wide open and they want you to take that shot. But I think he's going to have to start shooting the ball and making the shots and prove that he can, or else that's going to make it a lot hard on those other guys to keep doing what they're doing. The defense is going to start sagging off.
Yeah.
It's going to be tough for the other Buckeyes if he doesn't start, producing some on the, even if it's a drive and get a foul, get a whistle, get some free throws, just something to be productive on the offensive end.
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead, Justin.
I was gonna say you can't play 4-on-5. It's borderline impossible, and unless you have ultra efficient players at other positions, it's so hard to have that extra guy who's able to kind of roam and help. Wisconsin dealt with it a lot last year with Carter Gilmore, who was a guy that he does some really nice things from an energy standpoint, but you don't want him taking shots. And when he's out on the court, teams acknowledge that, and they just would say, "If you put him on the 3-point line." If you can't hit threes, then the defender's basically below the free throw line. And it's like you have an extra post defender then. Like that makes things so much more complicated from an offensive standpoint at that point.
The one thing I will say about it is that I do feel like Chris Holtmann is doing a good job of minimizing that, because he's not leaving Evan Mahaffey in there for 8-10 minute long stretches. He's putting him in, letting him play his defensive plays, and bringing him out, which you don't normally do with a guy because they have to get into rhythm and play offense. But if you never get into rhythm and play offense,
if you don't have to do that,
exactly, just go in and guard the guy. So it's very interesting to me, and I think it could be one of their weak spots going forward. But Chris Holtmann, in this game, he put his bench, where he wanted them. 15 minutes Zed Key, 16 minutes Scotty Middleton, 15 minutes Dale Bonner. Devin Royal had 2 minutes as well, but they're starting to get their rotation that I think they want. No Tayson Chapman. This is kind of what I expected from Scotty Middleton coming in. I don't think he's the most talented freshman, but he has the skill set that they need to be kind of that 3-and-D guy. He was 2 for 3 from the 3-point arc, so he obviously helped with what you guys were talking about there. Justin, is there anything that we can take from this guard duo of Ohio State and say there's something that's going to stop them eventually? There's something that defenses can do and stop this, because, they combined for 44 in this game. Any guard duo that does that is going to be really hard to stop.
Yeah, the big thing is going to be just if you can keep penetration away and force them to shoot from the outside, that's going to be with any guard duo, is to try and force them to take long distance shots. You hope that they just aren't hitting them at that point. Better defensive teams are going to be better on that. They're going to close out strong, and they're going to be able to hopefully stay in front of you, or at least help if you get by somebody. And if you can do that, you can hopefully minimize it, but you're probably not going to be able to stop them outright. You're going to have to try and just minimize as much as you can and at least make it hard for them.
Yeah, for sure. Mike, if you had to think of one or two teams in the Big Ten that would be able to best do that, kind of be the strongest defensive battle for Ohio State and these guys, who would be 2 or 3 teams in the Big Ten that you would say they could possibly win that battle?
Yeah, I think you look at, obviously a team that's super athletic like a Michigan State. They always got the guys that can close out. They always got freak athletes that can do, that type of task. I think Illinois has one of the best defenses in the country at this point. They're going to be able to clamp those guys down, you would think. And then obviously, Purdue's a solid squad. Their defense is going to be good, but a team that I kind of want to give a shout out to is Rutgers. I think they've been very impressive on the defensive end so far this year. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to completely stop the Ohio State guards from doing what they want to do, but as Justin had said, you kind of mitigate it, try to make somebody else kind of beat you. And if they're going to get there 10 to 15, that's so be it, but force someone else to, make up that difference instead of giving up 20 points to those guys.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's going to be the key, is making somebody else on this offense beat you, whether it's Zed Key, whether it's Felix Okpara. But that's the huge thing with a guy like Jamison Battle. I think he was one of the best transfer additions in the Big Ten. I think there were obviously other very good ones as well, but he was one of the best, not from like a skill point, but just like what the team needed to be able to do what they're doing. So don't sleep on the Buckeyes this season. I think the Gophers played a good game. I think they're better than maybe their record will indicate at the end of the year. But don't sleep on the Buckeyes. They could, if they don't have their January slump where they lose like 8 or 10 in a row, They could be pretty scary. So before we do move on, I want to remind you about CBB Analytics. CBB Analytics gives us a free pro tier to tell you about them every single basketball episode. So check out CBB Analytics. They have free stuff for you. It's really good stuff. They track everything. They have tons of game recaps. If you ever miss a game, go to their game recaps. They have so much information, helps you feel like you actually did watch the game, know what's going on, and at the end of the day, you will be a smarter basketball fan for going there. So go to CBB Analytics, see what they got. They do awesome work there, and maybe think about purchasing a tier or something like that, because they really do help you out a lot there. All right, guys, let's move on to Oregon and Michigan. Buzzer beater in this one. The hometown kid for Oregon made it. It just kind of a heartbreaker for Michigan. Michigan, ever since Juwan Howard has been back, it's just not looked like the same Michigan team. The defense hasn't been there, but the offense hasn't been quite as good as maybe we saw before. Mike, what are some of your thoughts on Michigan in this game and maybe just in general this season?
Yeah, I think Michigan's kind of still holding on to that St. John's win, hoping to find another one here. I mean, they're sitting at 4-4 right now. It's just been a kind of a confusing season for me from what I've seen from Michigan. A loss to Memphis, a loss to Texas Tech, and now another loss to Oregon. It's always tough to lose on a last second buzzer beater three, but even without that, they're going to go to a second overtime, and I've just, like I said, I'm not sure I've seen what I need to see from Michigan. I'm just a little confused if we're talking about guys that are kind of disappearing. Reed Jr., he's playing 21 minutes. He's got no points. Another one of those guys that you're just kind of scratching your head what he's bringing to the team. It's a little confusing for me so far. I'm not exactly sure what to expect from Michigan at this point.
Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, I've watched Michigan, and that, as somebody who's had them be one of our rivals over the last couple of years, they, for whatever reason, from a mental standpoint, you watch those old teams that they used to have, the Final Four teams a few years back, that seem to really play at a high level and be able to just make smart decisions in tight games. This team struggles with some of that stuff. Like, there's the little things that they just don't do overly well. They have all the talent in the world. They're capable of being a top 10 team, but they just make mistakes and things like that keep other teams in games that they shouldn't. And you look at it and I don't want to bag on the coaching, but it's been kind of a weakness for that team. I think as the coaching staff has not exactly gotten these guys to buy in and play not only unselfish, there's a lot of ISO ball. Like, if you watch this game, who was it? The point guard for Michigan
McDaniel.
He was constantly calling people clear outs, and I'm like, this is a surefire way to get your teammates to basically just stand around and do nothing. You get super stagnant when you have somebody that just wants to start jacking up threes from 25 feet out. That's a problem. They have to figure out a way to play cohesively as a unit, and that would make them so much better if they could consistently do that.
Well, and that was the thing. When Phil Martelli was in charge, they did have like a more cohesive offense going. I felt like more guys were touching the ball down the court. I felt like Doug McDaniel, which by the way, Doug McDaniel is an amazing offensive talent.
He's a very good player.
I'm not taking anything away from him. He deserves to have the ball in his hands and get some ISO ball every single game, because he is just that spectacular. But at the end of the day, that can't be your only offense. It reminds me a bit of Ohio State last year with Bryce Sensabaugh. Bryce was all offense, very little defense. I mean, I think Doug McDaniel is not a terrible defender. I don't think he's anything spectacular. I don't know if maybe average, but he is just this offensive talent that you kind of, if they're not careful, they're just gonna kind of rely on him to be their only offense down the floor every single time, and that does come back on Juwan Howard and coaching. Mike, are you having the questions about coaching with this Michigan team that we are as well?
Yeah, I think, and we're talking about a lot of ISO ball. They're actually ranked like 220th, I see right now, in assists per field goal made. So plenty of ISO ball. That's well below average as far as they're like 47%, well below average on, assists per field goal made. So it comes back, like you said, it comes back to coaching. I don't know. I'm not the guy that makes multi-million-dollar decisions, so I'm not going to sit here and say what the coaches are doing are right or wrong necessarily. But just like I said, a little head scratcher. I want to see a little bit more team ball, like you said. If we're just iso balling, you're going to end up, guys standing around, and then the offense is stagnant, and it's not a good look for anybody then. And that's how you get more close losses like this, is if guys just aren't touching the ball, aren't being productive on the offensive end of the floor.
One of the other underlying things is Oregon did a really good job of slipping screens in this one, and they were getting some nice, easy looks at the rim, because you could see it. There's a couple of times in watching this one where the defenders were just getting angry because the switch would happen at the top, and then they would just not react, and it'd be an easy layup. And it's like, see, this is one of those things. If you want to be a really good defensive team, you have to be more aware of that, because that's one of those things that's going to give easy hidden points in a game that end up being the difference.
Well, cohesion and communication on defense is so important. And when I don't mean to keep coming back to it, but really, I mean, basketball, the game is all played together. Your defense and your offense is all played together. You can't go down the floor and play iso ball every single time. I mean, they had 11 assists and 16 turnovers in this game.
Yeah.
You can't be not sharing the ball on offense and then come down and play defense and expect to be cohesive and communicative. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. You have to have some kind of, working together and working in a cohesive way. I know I said that word a lot, but it's just what I keep going back to with this Michigan team is, are they cohesive? Are they working together? I feel like with Juwan Howard's NBA background, I don't know if he is building that with this college team like you need to. This is what we see the great college coaches do. This is what we see a Bill Self do. He takes these amazing players. This is what we saw Coach K do, is he takes these amazing players who really could just win the game on their own, and then he brings them together and says, guys, you're a team. Play together. And I just don't see that with Juwan. Mike, if we're being honest here, do you think Juwan makes it to the end of the year?
It depends. Let me look at their schedule real quick. I don't know if they have a whole bunch of, I guess they have Florida in the non-con still. That's a kind of a signature win they could get. It depends how many kind of signature wins, if they get a big win over Purdue or something like that. But they play Purdue pretty late in the season, and now you're kind of wondering, is he going to be around long enough to even see that game? So I think it depends. If they get things righted, I think they definitely, as we mentioned, have all the talent in the world. So I think they get it right, and I think they give them a chance to stick it out this year. I'd like to see that. I'm never a fan of somebody losing their job, but if the slide keeps, they've lost 2 in a row now. If they go into conference play and they lose 3, 4, 5, out of the first 6 or 7, it's gonna be tougher to argue to keep them around for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that's what the hard part is. I don't want to see guys get fired either. I especially don't want to see them get fired in the middle of the season, because I think that's so hard on the players. But just with the way that the coaching carousel works nowadays, if you're one of the first ones to fire, you're one of the first ones to hire. Exactly. Like, that's what you want. We saw it with St. John's and Rick Pitino last year. One of the main reasons they were able to get him is because they let go of I forget his name, but the old coach there at St. John's, they were able to let go of him pretty early. They weren't making the tournament. They were able to move on from him, and when Rick Pitino lost in the first round, kind of the match that needed to happen. So, Justin, do you have any thoughts on Juwan Howard and his future?
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on what their expectations are for him this season. I would think that the administration's probably looking for you to be, top 5 Big Ten. And I don't know if I see that with them. I think there are a few teams that are really going to be fighting in that area that they are not playing remotely as clean a basketball as right now. And I think it's going to be hard for them. If they start fading into the bottom half of the league, I think that could be what basically costs them at that point. Because if they end up with a roughly 500 record or around that area, I think it's going to be hard to really sell yourself on keeping him.
Yeah.
Well, the good news for Juwan Howard is that the football team is doing very well.
That makes it harder on him. The expectations are so much higher.
Yeah,
now.
True.
Well, I was going to say he's got some time to right the ship before Michigan fans are paying too much attention.
Yeah. True.
So, which maybe they will be with the conference championships over. They will be paying more attention to that. Guys, another team that has not really been performing to expectations this season is Maryland. Kevin Willard is having a hard time with this offense, and Mike Woodson, he's been having a hard time with the defense, but they were able to correct it a little bit in this one. Indiana was able to beat Maryland 65-53. Mike, what were some of your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think it's kind of what we've come to expect from Maryland here. They shot 2 for 16 from three. They've been one of the worst 3-point shooting teams in the country this year. I wonder about them. I don't know what's going on necessarily in College Park there. It's not looking too hot for me. I think it's a big win for Indiana. It's a tight win. It's always, it wasn't a tight win. They won by 12, but tight win as far as it's a conference game. Start the conference off right against, everyone's going to bring their best in that first conference game. So I love it for the Hoosiers. They're 6-1, kind of where they want to be, looking better. It's just a head scratcher for me of what's going on for the Terrapins. As I meant, the 3-point shooting has just been so poor this year. I'm wondering what's going on with them.
What's kind of crazy is that IU shot 3 for 9, so they only had one more three. But to their credit, they were like, "Hey, why keep shooting if we're not going to make it?"
Yep.
So, Justin, what were some of your thoughts?
Yeah, the big overwhelming thing for me is if you look at it, Maryland was just bad shooting overall in this game. They're only 35% from the field. And then you look at the rebounding, Indiana killed them on the board. So it's 46-30 rebounding. And those two things coupled together are going to make it really difficult for you to be able to stay in a game. Likely that was probably the difference in this one, was effectively they just didn't shoot well enough in order to be able to overcome the rebounding difference.
Yeah, and that's huge for Maryland because Maryland has a lot of good guard play with Jameer Young to be able to make things happen. But if you're not able to battle down low and get the rebounds and do those kind of things, it kind of minimizes Jameer Young in a few different ways. I kind of had a lot of hope for Julian Reese going into this season. I thought he was good last year. I don't think he was anything spectacular, but I thought we saw a lot of bright spots. We saw somebody who could come in and do some good things, and he's still doing good things this season. But I don't want to question his toughness because that's obviously not my place, but he doesn't look like he is excelling down low against some of these bigger guys like maybe we'd expect him to. Do you have any thoughts on that, Justin?
Yeah, I look at him, and he's a guy who I think is a good athlete, but I question his skill level. Like, I'm not sure he's a guy who's necessarily capable of just kind of putting a guy in a blender down on the block and making it complicated and being able to really attack them. And I think that's what makes it difficult because he's got a nice little jump hook. But other than that, he really doesn't have a lot of go-to moves to be able to get himself easy shots. And if you're physical with him and kind of can create some distance down there, we've seen it as a Wisconsin fan watching Crowell for us. He's a guy who, when you push him away, watching him turn over his shoulder and throw a 10-foot hook shot, I'm like, you're driving me nuts. You're way too far out. Stop taking that shot. Like, if you're within 5-6 feet, go ahead, take it every time. But you're 10 feet out, that becomes a lot less high percentage. I'm like, and that's kind of the thing you see with some of these guys. They know they want to take a shot, but they don't understand how to necessarily put the defender in an awkward position where they get themselves a clean, easy look. And it's one of the things Edey's so good at because he's able to just basically body you until he gets you exactly where you want to.
Well, when you just throw the ball down every time, like your hook shot is 6 feet out, and you're just like,
He's got the Fisher-Price hoop. He's just throwing.
And the other guys look like toddlers.
Yeah.
Mike, I want to go to you about Kalel Ware because Kalel Ware was a bit of a question going into the season, and he gave Julian Reese all he could handle in this one, stretching the floor. He hit 1 3-pointer in this one, only attempted 1, but he hit 1 3-pointer in this one, had 14 rebounds, 18 points. I mean, Kalel Ware has surprised me with how Mike Woodson has been able to get so much out of him. I still don't see a fire out of him that maybe I would like to see, but he might not be one of those guys. Speak on maybe a little bit of what he's been this season and how important he will be to the Hoosiers going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's everyone wants to talk about Big Ten ball and how important it is to have a big guy down low. It's crazy important, I think, for him to provide that. As you mentioned, 1 for 1 from 3. If he's going to be able to stretch the floor like that's huge. Like you said, kind of a question mark coming in the season, what we're going to see from him. I've been thoroughly impressed so far. He's averaging, it's like 7, 8, 9 rebounds a game now. He's 17 points. He's almost averaging a double-double. He's been very impressive for me. I don't know, like you said, the fire, but like you said, maybe he's not one of those guys that comes out and gets hyped up like that. As long as he's cool and collected, if he keeps giving performances, an 18-point, 14 rebound performance, you can be as calm, cool, collected as you want to be. It's very impressed from him. I think once he goes against some maybe some higher tier bigs, I mean, Zach Edey, guys like that, we'll see. A real big test in that case. But I've been thoroughly impressed. I mean, he's a sophomore. He's a young guy. He's got a lot to learn still. I know especially with post play, it's a lot of finesse, a lot of technique. So love what I'm seeing from him so far for sure.
That's what I was going to say, is I'm really excited to see him against Zach Edey because, even though Edey is obviously still bigger and taller and all those things, he just has that length and that wingspan to be able to battle with Zach Edey like some other guys haven't been able to do this season. I'm not saying you leave him one-on-one on the block and just, let it go, but he's more reliable than in his size than maybe some other guys have been. Last question, Justin, before we move on from here. I hate to ask it because I actually love Xavier Johnson. I think Xavier Johnson plays with a fire that I really appreciate. I think he's a good college player. Do you think that this Indiana team might be better with that Xavier Johnson on the floor?
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that can get you in some – if he's hot, he's hot. And if he's not, he can shoot you right out of a game because you always see that with certain guys who want to believe in themselves a little too much. They're the heat check guys where it's like, all right, just sometimes less is more and go out there and make the easy plays, get everyone else involved and just take what's there. That's actually when we were talking about Blackwell earlier. That's one of those things where if he could figure out a way to get himself just to take the easy shots that he's able to create, he would probably be so much more efficient and actually help them to become a better team if he would do that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Xavier Johnson is one of those guys that he can bring so much to your team, but he can also take so much away as well because in the middle of the game, everything can be going right for your offense, and then Xavier Johnson just does something that you're like, why are you going away from this? Come on, just keep doing what's going right. But then he can also be that guy where it seems like nothing is going right, and then he does something, and you're like, oh, wow, okay, that works.
That'll work.
So it's crazy. If Gabe Cupps was a little bit older, had a little bit more experience, I think I might get there. But I think with Xavier Johnson's experience, you got to get him back on the court as soon as possible. So, but loved what we're seeing from the Hoosiers in this one. And Maryland's got to figure something out. So, all right, I said we were going to get to them, so let's get to them. Illinois and Rutgers. Rutgers loses this one. Tough game for them. Illinois wins 76-58. Obviously was, a tough one for the Rutgers to be able to come out and play this one. But Illinois, they just got onto a roll and really made things happen. Justin, what were some of your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, Illinois, watching this one a little bit, this Terrence Shannon he had a game. Like, he was 8 of 13, 23 points in this one. And the athleticism that Illinois has, if they're shooting well, they're going to be a problem for everybody. They defend pretty well. They have a bunch of athletes with plus length on the court that are going to be guys that are going to cause problems for you. They have a young big man on that team that seems to be a little bit of a problem too. They have some bulk in there again. And, I think we all remember Kofi Coburn. You get guys like that with Illinois. Yeah. It's just a problem. Like, you don't want to be dealing with a guy who's got some size and some bulk in the lane that's actually has some athleticism. It's much easier if they can't move.
That's what we wish every big man would not be able to do is move. Mike, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think my takeaway is I'd mentioned you asking about, some good defensive teams that could lock down Ohio State, and I mentioned Illinois. That was my takeaway is the defense from Illinois holding Rutgers to shooting 33% from the field. A tough shooting night for Rutgers. I think that's just speaks to Illinois as Justin has mentioned, the athletes, the plus length, they're going to get in passing lanes. It's going to be a tough contested look no matter where you're at on the court. Just very, very impressed by them. I think after the feast week with all the Thanksgiving tournaments, I was like, oh, Purdue's going to run away with it. I don't know if anybody, but Illinois is kind of creeping up there for me now, and I think they definitely have a shot to contend with what Purdue's bringing. It's a very talented team, very good on the defensive end, and they're gonna make it into a rock fight every time you play them. And Shannon Jr. obviously he's averaging like 20 on the year, something like that. You got a guard play like that, it's it's always going to give you a chance.
Such good size for a guard too. He's gonna be a guy who can be able to bully other guards in the league all year long.
Yeah, I mean, in Illinois, they don't really have like a true point guard on this team. I mean, maybe Goody, maybe Harmon, but I mean, Terrence Shannon Jr., he really is the point guard for this team, the primary ball handler, making things happen. Coleman Hawkins obviously handles the ball some too, but I don't think he's the guy that you want to rely on the entire game to be doing that. Speaking of Coleman Hawkins, I've said this Illinois team will go as far as Coleman Hawkins takes them, because you can have really good Terrence Shannon Jr., but if you have really bad Coleman Hawkins, it's really going to take away from them. Coleman Hawkins only got 6 points in this game. He did get 8 assists, so that's a good thing there. Am I wrong on Coleman Hawkins here, Justin? Is there maybe another part of this team that doesn't need him to be as great? What are your thoughts on that?
I think if you were talking about them to win the league, he has to be an above average player. Like they need him to be, because he's a guy that can make it complicated for teams based off of his athleticism at that size. He's a guy who can really run. He's a guy who can shoot it from the outside, and he doesn't necessarily shoot it at a high percentage consistently, but he's capable of getting hot. And when he gets hot from the outside, when you have 6'8", 6'9", he's a guy who's capable of really causing some problems, because you don't have anyone that can defend him. You know, it's one of those things where there's very few big men in this league that can really move well at the power forward position, and most of them can't stay in front of him if he gets the ball and going downhill in the dribble.
And I was surprised that Illinois this season, we're not seeing the Dane Danger experience that I thought we would see. We're not seeing him down low on the block, making the things happen that need to happen. I mean, I only played 8 minutes in this game, and it kind of has been that way from time to time. Is we're just not seeing Dane Danger get into these games and have the impact that I think some people expected him to have. Mike, do you attribute that to bad play by Danger? Do you attribute that more to just like a different direction Illinois is going? What are some of your thoughts on him so far this season?
Yeah, I think maybe they're just going with what's been working for them so far. I mean, they've been looking good, and it's kind of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I don't have any doubt that the coaches, have any doubt in him necessarily. I think if he gets called on, he can definitely provide them with good, solid minutes. He's a fantastic athlete, fantastic player. So I think they're just kind of sticking with what's been working for him so far. And I mean, his minutes haven't been there, but I think he's a great player, and I think if need be, if his number gets called, he's definitely going to show up for him.
Yeah, and another big man that didn't have the best game. I mean, he played 29 minutes in this one, was Cliff Amorier. He did manage to pull down 9 rebounds, but only 7 points. On the defensive end, I will say, outstanding. 8 blocks in this one.
Yeah,
that is obviously going to be a huge piece. But on the offensive end, just not really what you want from the best player on your team to be able to make this happen. Justin, you have any worries about Cliff Amorier and his offensive game going forward?
I mean, not really. And I would say it's one of those things where just give it a little bit of time. I think that as they get into the league and he gets settled, he'll be fine. He's a guy who's proven that he can play at a high level already previously. So, I would just chalk it up to Illinois is a bad matchup probably for him, because there are some guys who can kind of get around him and make him uncomfortable, where most other teams aren't going to have the big athletes that they can kind of surround him with and kind of make it complicated.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point there. So 3 for 10, 1 for 4 in free throws. That's a tough situation. Got to be better on the free throws there. So, all right, guys. Hey, that's all the games we had to bring up. If you guys have anything else around college basketball you want to bring up before we get out of here?
Not for me off the top of my head. It was such a busy weekend with football and everything else.
I did tweet out there. I said, because I watched multiple games, obviously, but I had on my iPad next to me, I had Penn State and Bucknell, and I said something like, "Oh, conference championship games this weekend." I'm watching Penn State and Bucknell. Little did I know Penn State would lose that one later on.
Yeah,
tough situation for Penn State so far. But as we get deeper into the season, we'll be sure to talk about every Big Ten game. With football going on right now, we'll have definitely more basketball episodes to get to this month with bowl season. season, less Big Ten football being played, which means more Big Ten basketball talk because it's only going to heat up more from there. So, Justin, thank you so much for coming on. Mike, thank you so much for coming on. Like I said, go visit these guys. The Bucky Report for Justin and Scarlet Shootaround for Mike. Really appreciate you guys. Have a good one, and thanks everybody for watching.
Yeah, thanks.